Okay, I think we'll get started. We've got a fair number of people in here. Oh, Samson's in the room as well. Nice for you to join us, mate. Hey, that was a really good song. One of my favourites, actually. I had the good fortune of seeing Dave Chappelle. I think it was late last year, and towards the end, he brought on Talib Kweli to sing that song. It's one of the highlights for me. It's so good to be able to see that live in person. Hey, we've had quite a big week in the world, haven't we? Let alone just in Bitcoin. And I really wanted to get on these spaces and have a chat. And lucky enough to get Samson to come and join us. But before I invite him up to onto the stage, I just wanted to go over some of the things that have happened. Obviously, there's the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And we've seen really Bitcoin in action, as we were hoping never to actually see this scenario in play, but under immense stress, Bitcoin, the network, is standing up. Bitcoin, the community, is standing up. Enormous number of donations, I think well into the tens of millions that we're seeing right now, and really able to deliver the benefits and aid to people directly in a way that the fiat system just isn't able to facilitate. And so that's been a joy to watch under such terrible circumstances, that Bitcoin is living up to the promise that the narrative has pushed all along. Permissionless, censorship resistant, direct, peer to peer. It's actually working, and working so well right when people need it. You can just only imagine how many tens of thousands of people those funds are helping right now that would otherwise not be available to them. So, however however much that Bitcoin is helping that effort in people in Ukraine resisting an invasion of their country, hopefully it goes some way towards their efforts to maintaining their independence. Um, Look, today's session is going to be about nation-state adoption. We've seen quite a lot of progress in that space. To date, only one nation really has adopted it in the way that El Salvador has, and who could have imagined that they would come along and really take Bitcoin by storm the way they've embraced it, particularly from their president. But what started initially as a seed project on Bitcoin Beach in El Zonte has taken over a nation, and it's really energized the entire world towards Bitcoin, and serving as an enormous example of what can be possible. Now, they're still fulfilling the vision that they have with respect to that country's financial aspirations. They've got a city they're building, they've got volcano mining they're doing, they're raising financing independent of international financial organizations that have typically held them to ransom. So they're just starting out their journey, but in such a full and wholesome way that it's a joy to watch, and I can't wait until they fulfill that entirely. And then we've got Switzerland progressing in a number of different, I believe they call them cantons in Switzerland. One accepting crypto and Bitcoin for the payment of taxes, and then Lugano this week with an enormous announcement in a partnership with Tether, and I believe Samson's had a bit to do with that, and Paolo as well from Tether. So that was an enormous step forward, perhaps not entirely legal tender yet, but as far as I'm concerned, when a government says we'll accept Bitcoin now for payment of taxes and for all services, and we're going to facilitate the acceptance of Bitcoin in commerce, they've already got 200 or so merchants accepting Bitcoin in the city. That's a fantastic start. And so I really wanted to get someone on board and to give us an overview of what's happening for nation-state adoption. And it was particularly timely as Samson had just announced that he's leaving Blockstream as the strategy lead. I think his title there was the Chief Strategic Officer, to dedicate himself to further enabling nation-state adoption. And now there's been an interesting range of approaches in the way countries have viewed Bitcoin around the world, and most notably the two superpowers in the world. You've got Chinese authoritarian state, and then you've got the United States, which has pretty much had a hegemony over global affairs for certainly my lifetime. And they're taking two different approaches. One is completely hostile to it in China, and the other one allowing sort of the people in the free market to participate, but not giving legal and regulatory approval to Bitcoin so that its institutions can fully embrace it and invest, and for the flow of funds to go into Bitcoin as freely as they do into other investment vehicles and commodities and the like. So tentative on the American side at the federal level. China's just saying, get the fuck out of here. But it's interesting that we had some data during the week that said potentially 10% of all transactions are still emanating from China. Now, there's probably all sorts of technical explanations about whether or not that is accurate. I'm certainly not the person to explain that in depth at all. So it was just interesting to see that. And then we've got really kind of like what's happened in general population, where we've got the people who really get it from a technical point of view and ideological point of view, and also the people who really need it, who adopted Bitcoin first. And we're kind of seeing that play out on the global stage as well, where it's the countries that really need it. The institutional, so the global institutions have let them down. The IMF, the World Bank, and the like have really let countries like El Salvador down, and they've been really at their mercy of those organizations and the larger countries which are underpinning them. So out of perhaps sheer desperation, it appears to me that they've said, hey, what's the worst that could happen if we just embrace Bitcoin? We either stay poor or it works, and we lift ourselves up with a once in a century or a millennia opportunity with this new form of money that's truly global, decentralized, and digital property that we can actually own. And we might be able to get off our knees and have our own destiny in our own hands. What a change that would be. Now, that's a risk worth taking. And I really do admire President Bukele for that. I don't even know what his politics are on a domestic front. I know that there are a lot of people who complain, and some people say he has a very high approval rating. To be honest, I'm only assessing, I'm only praising him through the lens of Bitcoin. Whether or not that turns out to be the smart thing to do or not, this is a Bitcoin account, and so I guess that's my remit, and so that's what I'm doing. So we've got that. It's a big spectrum of actors within this space, and they're all, I guess, sticking to what's happened on the retail front. We've got countries, institutions, all jostling and trying to understand what's happening. And I get the feeling that, given the Biden administration's pending executive order, that there's been a lot of maneuvering in the background for among the regulators to carve out bits and pieces of this whole crypto digital asset landscape to regulate. And it really they haven't been able to sort it out amongst themselves. So it's going to come to an executive order to say, okay, this is how it's going to be. And I want each of you guys to go off and look at things just within this narrow band, and then we're all going to put it together from an executive point of view, and we'll just have a decree, and that's what it will be. So I suspect all along that we've just been seeing regulators jostling and maneuvering in the background, while not really saying too much in the public sphere. And it's all sort of come to a head. The executive has realized we've got to move on this quickly, so we're just going to tell you what to do. So let's see what happens on that front. There are rumors that CBDC decrees will come from that executive order as well, but nobody really knows if it's going to be positive or negative yet. So having said that, we've got Samson on the line. So I just want to ask Samson to put his mic on and say, give him a big welcome. Samson, welcome to the Spaces. I really appreciate you making the time to come on.
Thank you, Mr. Archive. It's great
Oh,
to be
thanks,
here.
mate. You can call me Archie.
That's what I
Yeah,
figured.
look, it escapes me that that I haven't shared my name with everybody, and I've just told people to call me Archie. So I've got to be mindful of the fact that just because someone follows my account doesn't mean they're following the conversation. Because you follow quite a few people, and you're busy, of course, and bringing nation states on board. So thank you very much for doing that. And what I wanted to start with, like everyone's really curious about when the next country is going to come on board, and I know that first of all, you have a lot of discussions in the background with various states and what they're doing. So I know that some of this is going to be particularly sensitive, and you can't share everything in detail. But how many countries are you sort of talking to in the background that have shown an interest in adopting Bitcoin in the way? Um, well, let's start with what El Salvador has done.
Well, I think the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, he's got a couple that he's working on too. So last time we met, he said he's got something cooking, and I asked him, "Do you want to compare notes?" And he said no. So I don't know which ones specifically, but I would guess it's nearby to El Salvador. There's a number that I am working on. There is a list. Mexico is on that list. So is Guatemala, but it's not necessarily working with the governments there, but more with people on the ground there that are trying to move the ball forward. So it's difficult to say who the next one is going to be, but I would strongly think that it would be in Latin America, if not Central America. So that's the most likely candidate that I think is coming up
So
for now.
just picking up on that, looking at the way that sort of Bitcoin has permeated through El Salvador, it started off as a project in El Zonte Beach that we call Bitcoin Beach now,
Mhm.
and then it sort of that served as an example. And I don't know if that was pointed to in discussions with Kelly in the process of orange pilling him, but is that the sort of roadmap to orange pilling a nation that you're looking at, or does El Salvador just fast track that and say, hey guys, look what El Salvador is doing? You don't need a seed project necessarily in other countries.
So for El Salvador, I would credit heavily to Yusuf Bukele, the advisor and brother of the president. So he was the one that really engaged with the Bitcoin Beach community and brought that to the president's attention. And from that point, I think it was fast track. So El Salvador is very unique in the sense that it is very fast, and because the president has such massive support in the country and in Congress, he can move things along very very quickly. So it's an outlier that a country can go this quickly and pass laws and go full orange pill mode. Um, Other countries, I think, will be a bit slower, and I believe many are watching El Salvador very closely to see what they what they what they end up doing, how successful it will be, and things like the volcano bonds, if those are successful or not, and that will largely inform the them of what they want to do and the pace at which they do it. But again, El Salvador is that outlier. I don't really see another country being able to pass a law adopting Bitcoin that quickly and with a majority.
So El Salvador, they've done three things essentially. They've made it acceptable as legal tender. They're
Hmm.
putting it on the balance sheet, and they're also using it for financing. Now, if we can just start with that list of countries that you have in your head that you're working with, um, where do you think they are most likely to start? What is their starting point in their journey towards Bitcoin?
Well, I think everyone is going to be unique based on their circumstances. So for El Salvador, I believe financing is an important part of the equation. For Mexico, I think their economy is a lot bigger. It's really big, and they're quite well off. So I don't know if financing is going to be the route they're going in. But the person I'm working with there, Senator Indira, she's trying to work on a law to mirror the legal tender in El Salvador. So I think every place is going to have a different solution based on what they are trying to accomplish and where their needs lie. Um, for places like Lugano, you mentioned it's a very developed city in a very developed country, but they're still trying to figure out how to adopt Bitcoin. And the motivation there, I think, is economic. They want to drive more businesses moving to that city because in Switzerland, every city, every canton, they're competing with one another, and that's part of the reason why Switzerland is so good, because you have that free market competition, right? People will go to where they're treated the best, and every city wants to treat people the best.
Yeah, so we're also seeing that in the United States with their state legislators as well. But before that, because we just touched on El Salvador, and one of the things that in my mind was that hearing what's his name, the Lord, I don't know how to say his last name, but he's on Twitter. He's a very active guy.
Lord
Seems
Husita.
that's it. Yes,
I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right either.
I don't know, but I didn't want to have a go at it because I couldn't remember actually. Look, he said that they're looking to mirror the legislation that's enacted in El Salvador. Do you have any insight into what they're doing there?
Not really. I like the guy, but I haven't seen much concrete action happen, and maybe it's because they had some natural disaster with the volcano eruption, but I haven't really seen anything move forward, and I haven't really been talking to them about the exact logistical details. But just going back to Lugano for a second, they're de facto legal tender, so they're not exactly legal tender because a city cannot declare Bitcoin as legal tender. They don't have that legislative power, but it is de facto legal tender, and I think we'll see more of that because passing a law, it's a very difficult thing to do. So I think the adoption is going to be more organic like that, which is just people embracing it, promoting it, and accepting it on the nation state level, if not having a law.
Yeah, I love that because historically, I mean, I've just started reading Dean's book, and the emergence of money has always been from the ground up, really, from an organic process until we had these fiat decrees, and we know how corrupted those forms of money quickly became anyway. So I like the idea that Bitcoin can be tested in those environments, in many different environments as well. And so we can take lessons, each region can take lessons from one another rather than just being decreed from above in a large country and then in a sort of one size fits all. But you said de facto legal tender. What are the consequences or the distinctions between a legal tender in an official capacity and de facto? Is there going to be any difference as such, or will Bitcoin effectively be accepted for anything and everything?
So the government of Lugano, and you have to give credit to Paulo. He was the one that drove this. I'm more helping out with the Bitcoin World Forum that's coming in October, but he's the one that worked with the mayor and the team there to plan out what their plan B was and how it would roll out. But every government agency will be accepting Bitcoin for payment, Bitcoin and Tether. And they're working on a way to integrate all the merchants in the city. So they're setting up a fund that will build software, maybe point of sale terminals that can be deployed out to all the businesses. But there is a concrete plan to encourage everyone to accept Bitcoin, and I think when you reach that stage, then it is de facto legal tender. But if you go back to El Salvador, um, well, first of all, legal tender is a law that says people must accept a currency, and I think it is needed because of the fiat monetary system. But ideally, you don't need a law saying Bitcoin is legal tender because the best money should win out, right? People should want to accumulate the best money. So legal tender laws are good. I think it's a useful tool in this space right now. But the real way is kind of what you alluded to, which is just organic adoption of Bitcoin by people. And for that, you don't really need a law. It's like you don't need a law saying you should breathe the air because oxygen is good, right? You just do it. And I think that is what we want to have ultimately, which is just people adopting Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the only sound money that we have, and it makes sense to.
So, like the organic development of a custom around Bitcoin as money, being accepted as money,
Yeah.
is in itself, the proof of concept, the proof in the pudding that it's
Mhm.
actually of value. It doesn't need to be decreed or given a legal stamp of approval.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think the decree is not the legal tender status in El Salvador is not something they're actively enforcing either. So if you do go to a business and they don't accept Bitcoin, and that is the case right now, like no one's gonna report them to the police, and the police are not going to come and say you must take Bitcoin, right? It's
yeah.
more of a tacit understanding that Bitcoin is endorsed in this country, and you should try your best, but they're not going and beating people because they're not accepting Bitcoin. So in a way, it is also a de facto legal tender.
So why were large companies so fast to implement it then? Was it because it was easy and they don't want to get offside with the government, might as well just do it? Or because it was just like Starbucks, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, everyone just suddenly had it. And I just would have imagined that typically these companies probably would have been a little resistant to it because it's an effort for not much reward in the initial stages anyway.
I think that's pretty much it. They're worried about being targeted, right? And this is
Yeah.
a topic I wanted to discuss too, because there are a lot of parallels in the Bitcoin universe. One is, a Starbucks or a Pizza Hut, they don't want to be smacked down by the government for not accepting it because they're a big target, right? It's
Mm.
easy for someone to go and say, hey, look at these guys, Starbucks, they're not taking Bitcoin. But if you go to some pupusa shop on the street and they're not taking it, like, no one's gonna make any fuss about it. But you have that same risk for concentration of, say, Bitcoin mining, right? If you have a large miner that's operating a mega facility somewhere, they're a target to be cracked down on in terms of regulation or just whatever flavor of the month sanction that you have, like block Russian transactions. So it's the same kind of idea. If you're big, then you're going to be a target, and that's why ideally everything is decentralized and small in Bitcoin.
So if we can, I guess I don't want to get too specific. Let's say you have X number of countries that you're speaking to in various capacities to take on or adopt Bitcoin in one way or another. How many of them would you say that are looking at accepting it as legal tender or de facto legal tender?
Um,
Percentage.
I would say maybe three on the list, or three or four on the list, are moving in that direction. The challenge is some of them cannot do that, like Lugano in Switzerland. They cannot pass a law or do anything saying Bitcoin is legal tender, so they have to find creative ways around that.
Mm-hmm. And what about putting it on their balance sheet?
That I think is going to be more common, and also nation state Bitcoin mining is going to be another route. Um, I think it makes a lot of sense for nation states to mine Bitcoin, just because typically, well, not typically, but a lot of nations have excess power. So if they can find a way to monetize that, it does not really affect them in any way. It's almost like they can get Bitcoin without any additional inputs other than the ASICs and the building of the facility, because they do have reserves and excess capacity.
So when you talk about excess power, are you talking about power they're already generating or access to power that they could be monetized or using to generate, for example, streams and the like, volcanic energy that's not being tapped, wind power, that sort of thing that's not really being developed yet, but that could be? Or you're saying they've actually got the capacity now, it's just not being monetized?
Well, it's a bit of both. So El Salvador has the potential, right? They have a vast untapped amount of geothermal reserves. So all they need to do is get some capital and tap into those geothermal wells. In the case of Canada, um, Canada has a lot of excess power, especially in Quebec. There's enough capacity, I think, in the Quebec production facilities to power maybe three Bitcoin networks. So every year there's a ton of excess. There's a lot of reserves that are not even used. So it's just water is just sitting there, right? So Quebec is largely hydropower. So we have vast reserves of water just not being used, right? They're just backup. And anything that we do produce in excess, Canada sells it to the US for dirt cheap. So it's not really about having the energy, it's about doing something smart with the energy. But I think Bitcoin will incentivize that, and it will encourage nation states to do better by their people.
Is there a growing awareness of that potential in Canada? Because I mean, we know he's the Trudeau is not very popular in the Bitcoin community for all sorts of reasons, deserved. Um,
I don't think he's popular overall in Canada, but
oh,
I'd
okay.
say there's no awareness. And oh, I see Fernando's here. Shout out to the Blockstream Lizards, Fernando and Vivek. But Fernando and I, we tried to submit an op-ed to Maclean's. It's one of the big Canadian magazines, talking about how Blockstream could help Canada mine Bitcoin on a national level, or at least the utility level. And there's no interest there. So I would say it's far away from the consciousness of the government, and they have bigger things to worry about. Like Trudeau is more worried about running away from protesters. So
Well,
I don't
can I
think
make a suggestion, Samson? We've got quite a lot of influence on Twitter. Why don't you publish that anyway, and I'll do my best to put it out there. And I know that there are other accounts who are even bigger than mine who will do the same. So let's push the message out there.
Yeah, we can definitely try. I think the best chance is Trudeau is ousted, and Pierre Poilievre, another politician, takes the mantle, because I think he's a Bitcoiner and he would see value in monetizing Canada's excess energy. Um, and he has a very firm grasp on the monetary situation of Canada, and I think he would see the value in doing something like this.
So what's the source of his interest? I've seen his name pop up quite a bit on Bitcoin Twitter. What is the source of his interest in Bitcoin in particular?
Well, he's never said Bitcoin directly to his audience when he's speaking, but if you listen to his speeches, it's all about Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoiners listening to him will read between the lines and hear the message, but it's really talking about sound money and how we're bankrupting the country and um, printing excess amounts of energy, sorry, excess amounts of money that are going to ruin the nation. And he's never said what the solution is, but I think Bitcoin is still too far out for most Canadians to really grasp. So I think for his campaign, he's going to focus more about sound money rather than about Bitcoin. But I think he is a Bitcoiner.
So when you say it's too far out, what are you alluding to? Is it the politics are too far to the left and leaning towards green policies with respect to energy consumption and the like, or is it just something that Bitcoin is just not understood? It's not in the public consciousness even to be understood.
Well, it's getting more and more in the public consciousness thanks to the protesters and the freezing of
Mm.
accounts. So I think we're getting there, but the vast majority of Canadians, I would say, don't understand Bitcoin, or they're too left-leaning and quote unquote environmentally conscious, and they're worried about energy consumption of Bitcoin. And it's going to boil the oceans and whatnot. So I would say overall, it's still very early for the average Canadian, and unfortunately, the average Canadian makes up a lot of the Canadian populace, and those are the people that will be voting.
And that won't be mitigated by Canada's ability to generate renewable energy or zero carbon energy, and also become a major player in Bitcoin mining. That as that won't Canadians look at that as an opportunity?
They should, but I think the average Canadian will just read along with the mainstream media and
Mm.
read along and follow the FUD. I think because Bitcoiners are generally very awake. We're aware of the matrix and what situation we're trapped in. But normal people, they really just read the headlines, and they think the headlines are real. Like, I've talked to people that have asked in the past about the double spend attack and why Bitcoin is going to fail, and how come Tether can keep on existing when they print money out of thin air. Like, there are people that really think these things, and there are people that really think Bitcoin mining is boiling the oceans, and it's going to consume all the energy on the planet.
Yeah. Okay. Look. That's really interesting. So I'm wondering whether, like, where we've got in the United States, the federal government has sort of stood in the way of the legal acceptance of Bitcoin, but now we've got the states saying, "Well, we're not waiting for you." Suddenly, we've got about 5 or 6 states proclaiming we're going to be the North American hub of Bitcoin. Is there an opportunity for something like that to emerge in Canada?
There's definitely the potential, but I would still say we have an over concentration of hash power in North America, particularly in the US. So what would be better for the Bitcoin network is if it was decentralized out of North America. So more mining in Latin America, more, all around the world, maybe in Africa, but the more geopolitically and geographically dispersed the mining is, the better it will be for the Bitcoin network. So you can the avoid crackdowns. Like I sent you that thread earlier from this guy
Mm-hmm.
Michael.
Yep, yep.
Let me see what his Twitter handle was really quick. Sovereign mindset. So he wrote this thread about the threats to Bitcoin and what we face in the future. And one of his points was, people attacking Bitcoin through pressuring the miners. And I think it's a very valid point. So, I mean, having more states do it is good, but it would not be as good as, a massive mining operation in Latin America. And this is also why I think El Salvador is so crucial, because, take away the Bitcoin legal tender, um, they're going to be doing nation state Bitcoin mining on a large scale, right, with the proceeds of the volcano bond. So $500 million invested into Bitcoin mining from a public company in El Salvador, right, La Heo, the geothermal plant. And that is really big. That would be like Quebec Hydro directly investing into Bitcoin mining, or some national utility in some other country. And I think people have missed that because there's a lot of other great news around it. But for me, I think that is the most important part, decentralizing Bitcoin mining. And this was a very apparent threat to Bitcoin's existence back during the fork wars, right? You had a very large concentration of miners in China, and all the mining pools are also Chinese based. So you can have someone like Bitmain threaten the network and say, we're going to do this. And we're going to have that same situation again if no one does anything. Like, having a nation state mine Bitcoin is, you could say that's a bad thing. And I've had some critics come and say, why are you helping nation states get Bitcoin? You shouldn't be helping them. We should end the state. Get rid of them. But I don't think that's a pragmatic approach. I think the more strategic approach is getting a lot of nation states to mine Bitcoin, and then you have um, a kind of a standoff, right? No one can shut off the network, right? They all need to collude, and I don't think that would be possible.
It's possible, just makes it so much more difficult because they'll all be working against each other's interests in that case.
Yeah.
And we've got different factions in the world re-emerging. So at one stage there was quite a global consensus, and we're all, most of the world was behind the American consensus, American-led consensus, and now that's fracturing, and we're seeing different factions, which probably for in the bigger picture, in the longer term, will end up with more consensus-driven international policy, or maybe it will result in more conflict. Who knows? But I think, to your point about the decentralization of mining, there's two things. There's geography that comes to mind, and there's also scale. So I've very recently just started inquiring into Bitcoin mining. And one of the things that strikes me is, how the fuck am I going to compete with these massive Bitcoin mining companies who, first of all, collectively monopolize the supply of the best Bitcoin mining machines? And second of all, how can I compete with that anyway? Even if I got it, I'm going to plug one of those in, and what's the maintenance on it? What's the profitability? Just getting your head around all
Mhm.
of the calculations on is it more profitable for me to do this, or should I just put my money into Bitcoin and just hold? And would that be more beneficial for me as an investor? So how do I even make that decision, first of all? And second of all, how do I gain access to a competitive Bitcoin mine when they all seem to be monopolized by the major Bitcoin miners. And so Intel's coming out with something that's meant to be cheaper, more efficient, but their full supply chain is, or their pre-orders are pretty much taken up already by 4 mining companies. So how can we further that?
Well, I think more companies will be making ASIC miners, so the demand should be tapered off a bit due to supply. It'll just take some time. Jack Dorsey at Block has been reported to be making an ASIC miner, and Blockstream is also working on one as well. So in an ideal world, you'll have a lot more supply, a lot more vendors in more and more regions that will produce the ASIC miners. So ordinary people should be able to buy them, but it's still challenging because you're competing based on power cost, right? So if you're mining at home, you're probably paying, I don't know, 8 to 12 cents, depending on where you live. And that's very difficult to compete with people mining at 3 cents, right? Or 2 cents. So that's always going to be a hurdle. And I think you might need to just use services that can host miners, like host retail miners. So I think Blockstream is not at that stage yet, but one of the goals originally set out was to be able to host retail miners, like people with 5 to 10 machines at a smaller scale. And then you have companies like Compass that are
Sorry,
trying.
Samson, can I just interrupt you? You're
Sure.
talking about hosting, and the benefit of hosting to an individual who wants to get into mining, what would that be to them?
Well, you would be able to access lower power cost, right? Then that would make individuals more competitive. Mining at home is always going to be a bit of a challenge just because of that, and you'll probably end up with ideological miners, like people that want to decentralize the network and are willing to mine using a higher electrical cost. And there are people like that, right? And there is a market for that. But I think the solution is probably a mixture of both. Some people mining at home, setting up a small collaborative mining op with several people and trying to get some cheaper power from their local utility. And it's going to be hosting with people that are purely providing a hosting service where you can send your miners to them and take them out if they misbehave.
Yeah, so we've seen examples of that, especially online, of people doing it in remote Russian villages that are, close to sort of energy hubs or energy operations as well, because they've got pretty close to cheap energy. It's cold climate, so you don't have to worry about all that cooling and whatnot. So we've seen quite a lot of that. I'm just wondering, because we approach this topic with the thought of decentralization in mind, and so if hosted mining is perhaps going to be one of the main options for people, does that negate the objective of decentralization?
Well, with mining, it's difficult because you're trying to compete with someone with vast economies of scale, right? So I think hosting is always going to be a component of it. But there's another route. I've talked about this over on and off throughout the years. But I think if you can if someone brought back the block eruptors, like their little USB miners, and you have a mining pool that would support that, then I think you could potentially get a lot more decentralization into Bitcoin. So if everyone's got a block eruptor at home where they're mining, it's not going to be a lot of hash rate, but it's something. But the mining pool would pay out over Lightning. Then I think you could incentivize a cycle, which would have a lot more decentralization around that mining.
Is that kind of like not even a micro miner? It's more like a nano miner, but it's just something that you'd have plugged into an energy source as small as a little device.
Yeah.
But because it's pooled collectively, that en masse, that it would have some level of scale to attract a mining reward and make it economic for everybody. Is that what you're sort of thinking of? Did I get that?
Yeah, it's kind of like the confluence of mining and the Lightning Network, and no one's really done that yet. But I think it's interesting territory to explore and see if we can get some traction there. Because if you can just get some sats over Lightning for plugging in this little USB miner, I think a lot of people would do it.
So we sort of discussed Canada's energy reserves that are not being used, and you said that it's just basically water sitting there waiting to be utilized. And I was looking at when El Salvador sort of made their announcement. I had a look at Brazil and one of their neighboring countries that had an enormous amount of untapped hydro potential. Have you had anything to do with that yet?
Maybe.
Oh, I see. Okay.
You mean Paraguay, right? I think
That's
there's
the
a
one.
big,
Yes, yes,
yeah.
Paraguay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I may have even tweeted about it, looked into it in quite some detail, and sort of shed my enormous ignorance about how to speak about energy, watt, and terawatt hours and all that sort of stuff. So, look, when I was looking at that, I was really quite enthused about the potential there, and was wondering if there was any sort of movement afoot there.
Possibly.
All right then. Okay. And so my next question, leading from that, which is kind of tangential to it, so you can relax. Energy companies getting into Bitcoin mining. Now we know that there's a lot of oil and gas companies who have flared gas, and we've just seen sort of headlines of those two young guys in their early 20s making 4 or 5 million a year from utilizing that flared gas. But I'm wondering whether or not some of these larger energy companies, particularly in the Middle East, have they expressed any firm interest in getting into that? And do you think that that could lead to some more interest from their sovereign wealth funds and the nation states as well from there?
I think so.
Okay, all right.
There's something there.
All right, all right.
But
No,
I
no,
don't
no.
want to.
Well, look,
I don't want to disclose it.
that's fine. I do appreciate your answer, because when I was looking into this, we had some very preliminary reports that sounded extremely confident and firm in what they were saying, and with that was followed up by an official and immediate rebuttal that it was nonsense. So one of the things that struck me was, first of all, why did they bother with the rebuttal if it was indeed nonsense?
Yeah.
And why was the initial report sounding so confident in their sources? So I suspect that it's viewed in a very strategic and important way. Okay, that's interesting. Geez, I wish you would. I really wish you would open up on that. Now, I have yeah, I really wanted to talk about that, but I appreciate that you can't. So we talked about personal mining. And oil and gas companies, mining decentralization, Bitcoin Beach project. Do you have anything else like a seed project sort of in the pipelines that might help? Or I should broaden that question. What else is going on that might hasten the adoption in certain countries that you can talk about?
Well, I think it's really El Salvador right now. Everyone's watching El Salvador to see what happens. If they can pull off a lot of things that they're trying to pull off, then I think we'll see another wave, probably from smaller nation states, because it's easier for them to do something. Nation states and cities, I think. That's another important one. But a lot of people have reached out to me and asked me, like, how can I help with this? And I say, just talk to, your local politicians and see what you can do. Like, no one's a fan of governments and saying, govern me harder, but governments are made up of people, and in the end of the day, those people can be switched out, and you can influence those people in a positive manner. So I would still say, if you're interested to do something, see what you can accomplish by talking to your local reps and whoever you can reach out to that wants to listen.
So if a government came to you and said, Samson, we're interested, what would be sort of the logical route of exploration that you would guide them through?
Well, I would see what their options are. I think you need to consult with lawyers that are familiar with the law, and see if you can do something like legal tender. I think that's a nice clean route, but ultimately it's going to need to be a mishmash of clever strategies to route around that, because laws are difficult to change and it's difficult to pass new ones. So it really depends. Like, economically, maybe mining is the answer, right? There's many different ways to adopt Bitcoin as a nation state outside of just saying it's legal tender. And I think legal tender is a good message, but it's not the most practical one. I think the most practical things after that are keeping Bitcoin as a reserve asset for, let's say, the central bank, and doing a nation state Bitcoin mining, because that will have a direct benefit to the network in addition to earning them Bitcoin over time. And I think nation state Bitcoin mining does another good thing too, which is it aligns nation states with the long-term thesis of Bitcoin. Because if you're investing in mining, that's a lot of capital expenditure. It's a ton of capex, right? Upfront investment into the facilities and energy production. And you're not going to be looking at Bitcoin on that short time horizon, which is where we fall, well, where the mainstream media and average people fall into the trap of, right? They're watching Bitcoin on a daily or weekly basis and they say, oh, it's so volatile. But if you're set up to mine Bitcoin for 10, 20 years and you have energy infrastructure, then you kind of understand that Bitcoin is not something you look at on that short time horizon, but you look at it on decades, a time horizon of decades.
And because a nation state obviously has an advantage in the cost of energy supply and the stability of that supply at a particular rate. So really their main investment is the energy infrastructure to tap into that and then plug in their machines. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I would say so. Like right now, your life cycle for the miners is probably 3 to 4 years, maybe more. It depends. It depends a lot on many different things, like the price and the quality of the ASICs. But I would say on average 3 to 4 years. But the energy infrastructure that they build is forever, right? Like a lot of these plants, they last like 50, 60, maybe 100 years. And there's a benefit. So let's say one day they don't want to mine Bitcoin for whatever reason, they still have surplus energy. And I think at a time in which the world is descending into clownland, people are trying to shut down energy production facilities because they don't think it's green enough. This kind of is a fallback measure, right? It's a way that they can have backup reserves if they need to turn them on at some time. And typically these are going to be greener than anything else out there. So if they do have a hydro plant, right, that they built for this reason, or a geothermal plant, well, then they don't need to burn more coal or gas.
Now, look, before when I announced this Spaces, I asked for some questions from our followers, and so I've got a few of those. You ready for them?
Sure.
Okay. So I've already asked one. What's the root and nature of adoption? How many countries are you speaking to? So we've got through some of those. Stacey had a really good question. Do you think that the maxim "you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you" also applies to the nation state? And if so, how do you think nation states will change on a Bitcoin standard?
That's a good one. So I do agree that you don't change Bitcoin. Bitcoin will change you. And I think El Salvador is a good example of that, right? They're just adopting Bitcoin and they're seeing Bitcoin change the nation. They're becoming far more prosperous. Tourism is up. Investments are up. I know a lot of miners trying to move into El Salvador to set up some operations there and maybe tap some of the geothermal themselves. But
So that's actually happening.
yeah, there are a lot of people exploring that right now. So if you set up the favorable conditions, I think people will come. And I think that's the most important thing that can happen in the world today, which is encouraging nation states to compete on hospitality rather than trying to tax the shit out of their population and impose capital controls or cost controls. Because at that point, you're just trying to squeeze blood out of a stone. And we know that doesn't work. The world has to open up for business, and conditions for business have to be free market. So Bitcoin drives that. Like Bitcoin is free market money, and it will encourage them to act in a more appropriate and good manner.
When you say appropriate and good, what are the values that you ascribe to that?
Well, I think it's largely capitalist, right? Like free market, embracing free markets, embracing businesses to do business, and you see that a lot of that in the announcement for Bitcoin City. They're not.
Okay, but we can't. I mean, America has not been short in embracing capitalistic ideals, for example, right? And yet
Well,
we're saying that Bitcoin can fix quite a lot about America, right?
It's difficult to say. I think the U.S. is a very unique animal. In many ways, it's very similar to China, but in many ways, they try to present it as not being the same as China. So the way that I would say America is not free market is over regulation and very heavy-handed regulation, which in effect is more a roundabout way to accomplish the same thing, right? If you make it so difficult to do business, you've effectively created a ban, and we did see this with what was that, the bit license and Kraken, right? So when it became so prohibitive to do business in New York, Kraken just said, screw this, we're out. And that could happen in a number of other places too. So the U.S. just uses different tools to accomplish the same thing, but look more like a look more like I don't know, more like a democracy.
So the bureaucracy gets in the way of what you're saying are capitalist ideals, and
Well,
to affect
the
the ban anyway, or make it so difficult as to affect the ban.
Yeah, like there's a lot of ways to ban. You don't need to ban. You can just
Hmm.
make it possible. And the bureaucracy, I think, has to go. Like Bitcoin eliminates a lot of middlemen, and I hope at the nation state level it would do the same thing.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, because I've seen a lot of discussion in the Bitcoin community that says Bitcoin Standard promotes longer term thinking. Do you go by that as well?
I would say so. And again, El Salvador is a good example of that, right? There's been a deluge of FUD and attacks on President Bukele and his adoption of Bitcoin. And I think if he was not looking at it on a longer time horizon, he might buckle. But it's more about long-term prosperity than short-term approval and nice fluffy pieces in the media praising him for things that don't matter, right? The things that matter are always going to be difficult and challenging, and there's not an immediate payout. So you kind of have to have the guts to follow your instincts and pursue long-term interests, which I don't think most politicians in nation states are capable of doing. They're more concerned about being reelected, and that's why you have a lot of bad policies on top of bad policies that kind of snowball at the end of the day and can bankrupt a nation.
Do you know what his popularity numbers are? Because I heard they were somewhere in the 70s or 80s, and it just sounds, absurd to me living in London and, from where I'm from to have those sorts of popularity numbers. But is that true?
It sounds absurd also in Canada too, but I don't think it's absurd. I think it's real. Like the people of El Salvador have been suffering for a very long time because of the previous political parties and presidents that have looted the nation, and he's the only one that has really tried to fight for the people of El Salvador and try to improve their lives on a number of fronts. And I think the best indication of this was there was some event in downtown San Salvador, and there's like a massive crowd, and he just ran ahead of everyone headfirst into the crowd, shaking hands and greeting people. You wouldn't see that in most places. Like his security detail was running behind him, and he was just charging first ahead of everyone, right? So unless you have that level of support, I don't think you would be comfortable doing that. Like definitely Trudeau would not be doing that. He didn't even want to meet with the protesters, right? He
Yeah.
fled to the U.S. So I do think he has that level of support in El Salvador.
Yeah, Trudeau's he's turned out to be such a fucking poser, I tell you. Um,
Yeah,
but
it's a disappointment to everyone.
oh, in a massive way. I mean, he's not even Obama. He's a cutout of wannabe Obama, and that's just the most. That's the worst thing you could be. Is an imitation of someone who wants to be someone else, and it's just been really, really bad.
Yep.
Um, all right, that's me getting political. Um, just to be clear, I hate all politicians. I think they're all disappointments. Except Sanders, I quite liked him, and that's going to get a few people riled up anyway. But I quite like that guy. I liked something about him. I really liked the fact that he seemed an honest person, even though
But
some of his
his,
principles are a little bit different to mine.
well,
Yeah.
he doesn't understand economics, right?
He
So
doesn't. No, no, no. I mean, you see some of his tweets, and it is what happens when people get on Twitter and they're sort of what we call in Australia feeding the chooks. Like you just you're just giving people what they want to hear, and
Yep.
it's not really an intelligent discussion of policy at all. And I think all politicians are guilty of that. So I kind of just sort of, oh yeah, whatever, and just overlook that. But
Yep.
in his interviews, discussions, and whatnot, I find him to be more reasonable than others. That I go, oh yeah, okay, he seems okay.
Mhm.
Anyway, we've got some other questions now. Look, what do you think Bitcoin has demonstrated um, in its use in Ukraine and also Russia so far?
Well, it's the perfect demonstration of the use case, much like in Canada, which is
I think so. Yeah.
it's apolitical money that anyone can use. And there's no way to stop that money from flowing, whether you like it or not. And really, that's the way that money should be. If you have some intermediary that can moderate the flow of money, then you have problems, right? You've confounded morality and money, and morality changes, and different people have different moralities. So, you know, it's better if money is just money and nobody can do anything to that money, and then you actually have to do some real work. So if you
Yeah.
don't like, I mean, if you don't like Ukrainians getting Bitcoin donations to buy defensive weaponry, then you're going to have to go after those companies that are supplying them, right? You can't just shut off the tap, right? And if you don't like the fact that Russians can use money, and ordinary Russians, not the ones that are actively pushing for conflict, but normal people trying to live their lives, then you're going to have to do something about that, right? I see control of money is a proxy for a lot of things. Like it's a way to try to lazily enforce to do law enforcement, right? If you just monitor every transaction and monitor communications, then you don't really need to go out boots on the ground and actually deal with crime. You can kind of survey it from afar and tweak some dials here and there and say you're done your job. So it just means you have to bring proof of work back to whatever you're trying to accomplish, whether it's law enforcement or fighting against another nation state.
Yeah, I've had a difficult time trying to emphasize that point that, if you want Ukrainians to be able to raise $50 million in Bitcoin, then, ordinary Russians are also entitled to use that to not be crushed by sanctions. And I think
Yep.
what happens in a time of war, it brings out the best and worst in humanity, which is such a cliche. But in this time, we're actually seeing that, where people develop this tribal mentality that anything that affects anybody on the other side of that fence is good, and all suffering is moral and justified, and only we, as in whoever we are supporting, is entitled to the benefits of the technology that we have. And we've seen that when MasterCard, Visa, PayPal, and pretty much an alphabet list of companies who have sanctioned Russia in one way or the other. Now, there are all sorts of arguments you can make. I've made the argument from the very first time when, there was the fake rumors about the invasion. I said, look, I'm against sanctions. I was against them in Syria, in Iraq, in Iran, and I'm against them in Russia as well. That's just a political stance that I have, because I know that it's people who get crushed, not the political and ruling classes. And
Exactly.
so when I look at something like Bitcoin, a technology like Bitcoin, it warms my heart that there's, some family somewhere you know, in Russia who's getting crushed by these sanctions, and they have some way of supporting themselves. I don't want them to starve. I don't want their livelihoods to
Yeah.
suddenly be crushed because of the decisions of their government. And to people who are listening to this, and I find it really difficult to stomach. And I just ask you, would you want to be punished economically for the decisions of your government by the entire international community? And of course, the answer is no, isn't it? But there's something in the human psyche that makes us want to rationalize suffering to other people that we are looking at as the enemy. And I don't think that's right. I've got Russian friends in London who are absolutely distraught because they're not for this, but now they're copying everything from people on social media to stupid questions and ill thought out questions by people at work, in offices, and the like. And here we have Bitcoin that's actually indifferent to it. It's not only indifferent, it's neutral. Okay, so anybody can use it. And so the old maxim, Bitcoin is for enemies, is in play right now. If you think you have a moral case in your support of Ukraine, which I wholeheartedly agree with, send some money.
Yeah.
Send more money than the Russians will get if that's how you feel about it. And that's actually playing out.
Mhm.
So yeah. Anyway, I went
Yeah.
on a bit of a rant there.
Well, I fully agree. Like,
Pardon?
the danger is peer pressure and kind of not doing what people perceive to be the right thing. And if enough people are perceiving that, you need to sanction all Russians, even like stop buying Russian vodka, right? Because we got to do something. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that something that they're trying to do is really not useful in the grand scheme of things. It's only going to hurt ordinary Russians. And people forget, like, ordinary Russians are the same as ordinary Canadians or ordinary Australians or whatever. When the government decides to do something, you really are just pulled along for the ride. There's not much you can do as an individual short of replacing the government, but those things happen on periods of years, right? It's not something that's going to be instantaneous. So there's no need to go after people that are just being pulled along by the ride. And I see some justifications of that. Like, if they were good Russians, they would be trying to topple the government and whatnot. But it's not that easy. And I think Canadians especially should be more empathetic to that, because even a peaceful protest, they went full on martial law effectively with the Emergencies Act, right? You lost all your rights, your bank accounts can be frozen, the bank accounts of your relatives or friends could be frozen, and they can seize your property. So what are you going to do? Like,
That's a
not
really good
everyone
point. Yeah,
not
I
not
mean,
everyone can do that, to take that stand.
there were 1 million British people who protested against when the UK and the United States invaded Iraq. And what did it count for? Absolutely nothing. So it's, yeah, and the Canadian example most recently, particularly with everything digitized, and we are so monitored and so easily put under pressure, sanctioned by the state, that it's just really unfair to put the burden on ordinary citizens to do that, to overthrow their government. I mean, how would I overthrow the government? Jesus, that's quite a burden to put on an ordinary citizen, to say we're going to punish you until you overthrow your rulers who have had effective control of the country for forever, basically. I mean, the Russians have always had very strong ruling class, whether it was through communism, the oligarchs, or even before that.
Yeah.
Anyway, Samson, I've had you here already for an hour, and it's kind of making me understand how easy it is for Joe Rogan to chat for 3 hours to an interesting guest. So I really thank you, but can we have you for another 10, 15 minutes and take some questions from the audience? Or
Sure.
you've got
Sure.
yeah? All right,
Yeah.
let me have a look at who we've got.
Well,
So if
you're
you
the
want
next
to,
Joe Rogan, right? The
oh,
Bitcoin Joe Rogan.
it's a real skill to learn how to interview someone, and the main thing is to just shut up after you've asked the question. And I think I'm struggling with that a little bit. Okay, so who have you got? Ricardo. Okay, we're going to put Ricardo up on stage. When you're ready, Ricardo, just unmute your mic, and we're ready for your question or comment to Samson. Go ahead, mate. All right, there might be a bit of a lag, so we'll just bear with him, and I'll take a look at some of the other requests. Are you there, Ricardo?
How you doing? Hello, Samson.
Go ahead.
Hey, Ricardo.
Hey, I just was wondering, in your experience, Samson, and what you've been seeing in all developments around mining in El Salvador, and I really think a lot about the difference between free markets of energy in the states and how that have really encouraged Bitcoin mining, and the big difference here in Latin America, where we have in many different countries, we have this monopoly, state monopoly around energy, energy production, and how that actually can slow down nation state mining. So, what's kind of your take on that, and how can we work around the idea of making these places, these countries, more free market friendly for Bitcoin miners to be able to harness energy, energy production, energy generation, which is actually well, a very difficult step to overcome if you're not exactly with the president or with the current political parties. And for example, in Mexico, we have a really slow government, which would not make it any easier. So trying to go through that gate, it's going to be really slow, and Bitcoin mining depends a lot on speed, infrastructure development speed. So kind of what's your take around that for Latin America?
Well, you're pretty much spot on. Like most energy production is a monopoly, right? And it's the same in Canada. It's all state companies that are controlling the energy supply. And the only hope is really that you can find some way to orange pill, maybe the president or something, and it can be fast tracked, right? And that was the case for El Salvador, right? If the president is for it and he has enough support, then the utilities can follow along. But it is a tricky path to take, and that's why I think it's prudent to start sooner rather than later, because these things do take a lot of time. It's measured on years, and people can underestimate that, and that's pretty dangerous. So it's important to start now, and I would say El Salvador will be helpful in this, because if Lajeo is successful in their mining operations, I think more and more will look and follow, because most people are followers. They're not going to stand up and be the first one. But the end goal, I think, is that Bitcoiners can demonopolize the energy grids around the world, right? I think the end goal of Bitcoin mining is it kind of merges with energy production. So Bitcoin mining companies will have their own energy production facilities, maybe their own hydro dam, maybe their own fusion plants.
Samson,
I
do you
think
think it's more likely to be the other way around, that energy production companies just become Bitcoin miners?
I think it's going to be a bit of both. So the question is which way it happens and which side the scales tip to. But I would say Bitcoin miners will try to secure their own sources of energy, and geothermal, I think, is probably an easier one to tackle, because it's more abundant in some places, and I think it's harder to say don't drill a hole in the ground rather than to say don't build a hydro dam on this lake or on this river.
Okay. So we've got Replicant BTC. You're up. So if you've got a question or comment, just unmute your mic. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks so much. Really appreciate what you do for the Bitcoin community, Samson. It's incredible work. I've got a question. Any advice you have on how to talk to local governments at the city and regional level about how to become like Lugano, Switzerland, how to start accepting Bitcoin for services and stuff along those lines? That's my focus these days, and I've got some important meetings coming up, and I'm just wondering for any advice you have on that kind of stuff. Thanks.
Right. I think the best way to start the conversation out is say, did you watch the news? Do you see what's happening in El Salvador? Do you see what's happening in Lugano? Because a lot of politicians, they're looking to be reelected, so you kind of have to align the different incentives, right? Like, if you can show them you can be a famous politician if you do this, then maybe they're more inclined to perk up their ears and listen. But actually, Archie, maybe you should get Paulo on for the next one of these, because he can talk about how he orange pilled Lugano, because he was the main driver behind all of that, and he could probably offer a far better perspective on how to start the ball rolling than I could.
Good idea. Yeah, I might reach out to him and see if he'll have a chat to me.
Yeah, I think he would.
Let's see. Did that answer your question, Replicant, or did you have a follow-up?
No, that's great. I really appreciate it. It really gets my mind thinking about, how to take on these kind of challenges, and, ultimately, politicians are in a game themselves that they're playing, and they want to get reelected. They want to get their needs fit for their constituents as well. So really appreciate that. Thanks so much. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Just on that point, Bitcoin seems to have a genuine and powerful halo effect for people, businesses, governments who do embrace it. We've heard Michael Saylor talk about that with MicroStrategy, saying that now doors open much easier because brand recognition is much higher. Who knows what the level of exposure in the general media has been because of their embrace of Bitcoin. I would guess that his appearances on mainstream media have gone through the roof, and that's also helped the brand recognition of his company. Nayib Bukele, for example, how many people before they embraced Bitcoin would have considered going to El Salvador for a holiday? We've got millions of Bitcoiners saying, well, actually, wouldn't that be a good idea? You know, we all see Max and Stacey on the beach on Twitter all the time, and like, oh, bloody hell, I'm stuck here in London. I've been here for 2 years. I haven't taken a bloody holiday in 2 years, and I just can't wait to get out. And I'll tell you now, El Salvador is one of the top destinations on my list. Just as a result of that, I would never have thought of going to El Salvador before that. So, you know, that's a really powerful thing to push to politicians and cities, to put them on the map. And you just look at how much exposure we give to a state or a city when they embrace Bitcoin. How many Bitcoiners knew of Lugano before they embraced Bitcoin? And now they've got a conference there. Who knows how many thousands of people may attend? And what kind of business emanates from there. So the halo effect is genuine and it's really powerful. They just need to get in early enough before everybody does, and it sort of just becomes part of the mainstream then.
Well, that's the game theory that we hope plays out, right? The sooner you get in, the better. So the competition is on. The race is on.
Definitely. I had someone here. Now I just want to add Evan as a speaker. Evan, you might take a bit of time connecting, but when you do, please unmute your mic and go ahead with your question or comment to Samson. All right, we're just waiting for Evan. Whenever you're ready. All right, let me see who else is on.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. Guys, I really enjoyed this, and I'm happy to be a part of this community. I was hoping, what do y'all think about the idea? I've just watched the new Ray Dalio video talking about the rise and fall of empires. And one of the things that he talks about tracking the metric of like a successful, empire is to the degree that the community is educated. And I figured if we're trying to get the hearts and minds of people and really win them over and show how Bitcoin is better than the traditional system, is there a way of creating like an online platform where people could log in, and then to the degree that they take courses and get educated and learn another subject of various things, wouldn't it be cool if we could reward them to get educated in Bitcoin? So that way we're supplying them with the know-how and the ability to do something with that knowledge, because now they actually have currency. So it could be a self-reinforcing platform, and went over a lot of support of, hey, look, did you hear what Bitcoiners are doing? They're literally educating the world and rewarding them in monetary, like pure monetary energy to do so. What do y'all think about that?
It's interesting. I think Michael Saylor has something, right? The Saylor Academy.
Yeah.
And Stefan Livera is like making course material along with a couple other guys. I think you should bring that up with them and see what they think. It's interesting.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Evan.
Yeah, I love what Michael is doing with that. I think on the rise and declines of empires and their investment and subsequent lack of investment on the way down is a really interesting thing to watch, because from abroad, when I'm looking at the United States, it seems that they've abrogated their duty to the children of America to invest in their education, and they're effectively saying, well, you know, who cares if our children are not educated? We can always just import the educated people. Now, just to be clear, I'm the child of migrants, of immigrants to Australia, and I've subsequently immigrated to London as well. So I'm not anti-immigration by any stretch, but I do think that it's the duty of a nation to make sure that its population is adequately educated as well. And so if there's going to be a symbol of a country's decline, I think that's something definitely to watch. And I don't think they've been doing a very good job of it, going by the various educational standards, or tables, I should say.
Right. And I would say as a parent or as like a friend, or the whole goal of like a collective society is like, I mean, education to really be born to, hey, look, somebody did something bad and somebody got hurt. Now let's learn from doing that and then not repeat, So it's just the collective consciousness of passing down to the next generation of, this is what we learned, this is what we did from it, this is how we move forward. And I just think if you combine that with like a monetary policy that literally had a direct incentivization mechanism, then who wouldn't want to get on board on that platform, that website? And then if you can look back at the online education system, you can see who's got the most points for learning physics or the most points for learning any kind of subject. And then you could like almost divert people resources in that way by knowing who's the smartest at any given subject and having them teach, be reiterative. Because at the end of the day, all you're trying to do is like get people to be smarter and reward them to be smarter. And this combines the best of both of those.
Yeah, I think that this is one part of the puzzle, but going to what Archie was saying, there's a deeper deficit, which is we don't teach children about money. And that should be a basic part of every educational curriculum. Like, what is money? How did it come about? And then at higher levels, how to manage your finances. I don't know about you guys, but in my upbringing and education in Canada, that's never a part of it. You learn a lot of history and, like Roman Empire and all that crap, but you never learn about money or what money is and how money works. It's just an afterthought, if that, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they had
Well,
some.
I will add to that not only do we not teach people through school, but I mean, you guys don't know this, but I've got a business degree and I majored in finance. And I would say that I was miseducated about money. I didn't know how money was created. I was told the opposite. I was taught the traditional way that, you have borrowers and lenders and banks and intermediaries, blah, 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 all that bullshit. They didn't tell me about central banks printing fucking money.
Yeah.
Right. And I got a finance major, right? I was paying attention. And that wasn't that long ago either. I'm not a dinosaur. So I would go so far as to say we miseducate people about money and finances, and the role of central banks is almost unspoken. And meanwhile, people think they're geniuses because they put a deposit on a house that went up in value, not really understanding that actually that's just monetary excess, and it's depriving other people in further generations from being able to provide their families with the basic good, which is a roof over their heads. And as a consequence, we have declining birth rates and disintegrating societies as a result of that. And people, they're just, other than Bitcoiners, there's a malady in society, not just, the United States, which is kind of the dominant cultural source online and Twitter, but also where I live and where I've been from. I'm Australian, and Australia is a very sort of upbeat sort of culture. But every time I speak to people from there who are doing quite well, everything is expensive. Housing is expensive and getting smaller and smaller. It used to be that you bought a house 750, 800 square meters was quite a nice size. Now it's barely 40% of that if you buy a new house, right? So that's tiny. It's really, really small. And so not only are you paying more money for a house, but you're getting so much less, and you feel like it's not really an accomplishment. It's not the dream that everybody has.
Yep.
Yeah.
It needs to be fixed eventually.
Well, that's why I just love the idea of paying people to learn in Bitcoin, because exactly what you said, the best way to get people to learn is for them to have money and learn with it. So everything that y'all just said, it's just so powerful. I think we get people to be educated. We give them righteous money because you give them two things, right? You give them the knowledge and the ability to know what's going on, and then the ability to do something with that knowledge, because now they have the monetary energy to do with it. And then hopefully what we end up with was a whole bunch of people that are educated, know something about money, actually have righteous money, and then we could build great engineering, cool stuff with, volcano energy and stuff. It's just awesome. I really appreciate y'all's time.
Thanks, Evan. I appreciate it. Samson, we're going to take one more question. Is that all right?
Yep, let's do it.
All right. Pierre, I've brought you up. Just unmute your mic, and we're ready for your question or comment to Samson. Go ahead, Pierre.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm actually here in El Salvador. I arrived 4 days ago. I'm here for a full month. And part of the work that I try and do as a Bitcoiner is educate people. So I made a film about this. And one of the things that I observe here while talking with people and trying to educate them too is that it's not used so much outside of, Bitcoin isn't used so much outside of Bitcoin Beach. And I'm wondering what is one of the reasons for that. And I'm thinking that, in order to make sure that we have proper state adoption, businesses need to be on board. And I think that having worked as a consultant for big corporations, one of the complicated things that they have is always accounting processes. And I'm wondering what kind of solutions are brought to help state adoption in order to help businesses, and whether these solutions leverage the blockchain directly at all, if you have any information on this.
Well, let's go through the first part. So the question of why there's not more adoption, I think has a lot to do with the initial rollout of the Chivo wallet, and there were a number of hiccups with it. I remember going to some shops and asking, "Do you take it?" And they said, "Yeah, we tried to accept Bitcoin through Chivo originally, but it didn't work, and then we just stopped doing it." I think a lot of people might have been turned off by that initial rollout, but it is improving now. I think Lightning actually works on Chivo now, so we should see things improving, but it's not going to be with that initial big push, which would have been ideal, but nothing ever happens 100% according to plan. So we just have to see how it plays out now. Hopefully they can do another push and get more people using it or using other wallets as well. But I mean, there is a benefit to Chivo, which is it lets them convert into dollars, right, for free. So it's a way for people to lock in value and avoid the volatility. In terms of all the other stuff like accounting, I think that for businesses that is important. I think there are people out there building a more comprehensive suite of tools around just taking Bitcoin as payment, like maybe Ibex Mercado. I think they have a pretty mature suite of products, and they're rolling out a lot in El Salvador as well. So you can check that out.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Thanks for your question, Pierre. Samson, you've been very generous with your time and really informative in your elaborate answers. I really do appreciate your time. It's been a great session. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. This was very fun, and yeah, we can do it again sometime.
Great, man. I'd love to have you on, and I'll reach out to Paolo. Hopefully, he can he will say yes as well. I get the feeling we're going to have a good conversation.
Definitely.
Thanks, Samson.
For listening.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.
Right.